Welcome, everyone, to our third and final session of Thinking with Newman, Educating with Intention today. We're really excited about tonight's session as we talk about the difficulties, the challenges, and the successes of realizing a university today. A university especially striving to meet some of Newman's vision. Like the previous weeks, we're not going to spend a lot of time on introductions, but we're going to move right into asking some questions of tonight's panelists who are here and ready. And so, Kevin, I turn it to you.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, we will finish over and out exactly within the hour. So those of you who have other things to do, we will be finished exactly at 7 Irish time. So we're going to start with Dara Keogh. Dara is the president of Dublin City University, which is a very important partner University of Notre Dame here in Ireland. Dara has been involved with Catholic education all his life, really. He's also taught with the University of Notre Dame, and he showed himself to be really smart because he married a graduate of Notre Dame and got married in the Basilica at Notre Dame. So he's kind of one of ours in a Notre Dame kind of way. You know, we love claiming people. But Dara now has the responsibility of trying to manage the university through the challenges of COVID. So Dara, in terms of dealing with this pandemic, and in terms of having to be the ultimate kind of decider at the end of the process, how difficult has that been for you, and how's the challenge been for you in terms of dealing with it?
Thank you, Kevin, and Father Gary, it's lovely to be here. It's the amazing benefits of technology, and I suppose the silver lining in the pandemic that I can see so many of my friends and colleagues around the table from. I see a friend there in Laguna, I see people in South Bend, people here in Drumcondra, all over the place. So there is a silver lining in this. So in terms of the, I suppose, the joy of leading a wonderful institution like Dublin City University, some of that, of course, is undermined by the pandemic. I'm conscious too that Rachel, the president of the student body in Notre Dame, was appointed pretty much at the same time as myself, and neither of us could have imagined that this would be the kind of year we have. There's a great line in Airplane, the movie, where the character says, "Oh, what a time to give up the cigarettes." And what a time, I suppose, to take up a leadership role in education. So I'm looking forward to hearing Rachel's point. We talk about this crisis as unprecedented, but in the context of Newman, it's important to remember that when Newman arrived in Dublin, he came in the immediate aftermath of the Great Famine. And so many of the Irish around the table would trace their roots in the United States to that point. So in a sense, Newman's vision of university was forged in that crisis, in the crisis of the famine. And while the idea of a university was a triumph in terms of shaping our idea of liberal education, I think that his tenure as rector of the Catholic University was challenged, and he wrote in his letters about the contrasting contexts and his challenges with what he called affectionately, of course, the paddies in Dublin. And Cardinal Cullen, who'd brought him to Dublin, again spoke about Newman. He said, he was fine in the halls of Oxford, but really in Dublin you need to be able to roll up your sleeves and get on with it. So I hope that I'm the kind of president that can roll up my sleeves and get on with it. We are where we are, as your president said, in COVID. But I think the two key points here, I think, first of all, that colleges don't depend on the president alone, but college communities are that. They are a community. And we depend really on the whole team at the university, and we have an exceptional team in DCU. The second point, I think, is related to the title that you're given the lecture series about teaching with intention. And that's the whole point. I think intentionality is the key. That our mission at DCU, we say our purpose is to transform lives and societies. And we're a public university devoted to the public good. That is our mission. That is our intention. And similarly, the great University of Notre Dame has extraordinary values. So we're both values-based university. We both work with intention. We both have excellent people and exceptional principles. They talk about leadership in a crisis, and they give you models of leadership. Were you were you a Lincoln? What were you in this context? The one that I think is neglected is poor Moses. Poor Moses spent 40 years in the desert, kind of wandering around. He at least had the benefit of a pillar of fire and a cloud of smoke. We don't have that. But I think for institutions like DCU and Notre Dame, the key point is our principles. And I think that we can use those principles as a compass in the COVID fog. And that's important for us. And sometimes people talk about crisis thwarting the strategic plan or crisis thwarting our ambition. The crisis actually tests the strategic plan and our ambitions. And really where strategic plan and values and mission statements come into their own, I think, is in the crisis, that institutions can bend, they can buckle, or they can blossom in crisis. And I would hope that our principles and your principles at Notre Dame will allow you to shine through that. And I think that for us, again, if I can boast on behalf of the institution, that we have seen, DCU as an agile institution, which we claim as part of our DNA. We've seen ourselves student-centered, and we've been called out even by the Minister for Higher Education here in terms of our ability to flex, change our accommodation models, teaching models, and so on. And ultimately, I'm extremely proud of our fiercely committed staff at all grades, the professional staff, the academic staff, right through the university, committed to the team. So I think that that's what brings us back to that intentionality. Nobody knows when this crisis will end. None of us have crystal balls, but it will end. And when we emerge from this, we will be judged by our fidelity to our mission. Do we deliver what we promise? Have we looked after our students? Have we looked after what Edmund Burke called our little platoon? How have we delivered our mission to transform lives and societies? So it's a great privilege for me to be in this position. I'm sure I'll have more grey hair when the COVID fog lifts, and we're great colleagues and supporters. So,
well, at least you have hair, Dara. But Dara, do you think there'll be long-term changes in education? People often say when it goes back to normal, but do you think there's going to be a kind of a new normal, or do you think even when we get through COVID, do you think the educational model as a whole is going to change to be, as you said, more agile, more flexible, and that we won't go back to some of the things that we used to do?
Well, I'd hope that we won't. Am I muted? I'd hope that we won't go back to some of the things that we were used to. And I think that this would be a lost opportunity if we did. Just as life more broadly, I think that one of the things that the crisis has really brought home to us, the things that are important. As Kevin said at the outset, we're moving now to the highest level of close down tomorrow morning in Ireland. And if you think of the things that we'll miss, if you think of the things that we have missed in COVID, in education, of course, the technology has been extraordinary. Conversations like this wouldn't have happened without the technology. But I think that what people really miss is that human interaction. Young people particularly crave human interaction. They're incredibly social. And I think that ultimately, when we come out of this, students will want more in terms of engagement rather than less. And they'll be more particular about what they want. And I would say particularly, you can see at a residential university like Notre Dame, the reluctance of faculty and students to abandon the model there to go online is itself a reflection of what that kind of learning community means and what it means to be together. And that, again, back to Newman's point about the interaction, the interaction of minds, the meeting of minds, and the shared purpose together as a team. So yes, I think that the modalities will change, Kevin, but I think that the essence is important, and that's where the intentionality comes into it. What will we want it to be? And it's up to us to decide what it'll be.
One last one there, Dara, just on the idea of a learning community, which we hear a lot about, and it's obviously a combination of the students, who are maybe the most essential, well, the only essential characteristic, the students, the faculty, the administrative staff, the leadership. How do you see that learning community now and in the future? Do you think we've actually learned the lesson about the value of education? That the very fact when we were deprived of it and when kids couldn't go to school, for example, and you say with university, that in fact, as you said, that maybe there'll be a sea change in terms of how society views the value of education.
I think that we'll come back again. I hope that we'll come back again to discuss the kind of changes to the system more broadly. But absolutely. I mean, I think that where real education takes place is in information, really, rather than information. I mean, we have Google for information. And what I've been amazed with is the discussion on Twitter, the discussion in different fora, say in the United States, the Chronicle for Higher Education, or Inside Higher Ed, or any of these, that the amount of discussion that focuses on the human element of education, the physical growth, the mental growth, the whole wellness piece, the mental illness, focus on mental illness, and all of that, I think, reminds us of the need, again, as a learning community, to care for each other. And I think that's why at DCU, in terms of my own ambition for the university, that we would be known as the university that puts people first, in terms of our students, in terms of how we care for each other and react, but also in terms of our engagement and our research that would be centered on the world's challenge, that it is up to us to shape the new normal and to move on. All
right, thank you. Now we're going to turn to Dr. Thomas Green. Tom has been a longtime faculty member at the University of Portland in Oregon, and not everyone knows what Portland is out there. They know that they are a sister school to Notre Dame. I'm not sure everyone at Notre Dame understands that on the West Coast for now almost 120 years is a small school in Portland, Oregon, also in the Holy Cross tradition. Tom came to the university as an adjunct professor, and over the years has done so many different positions, including Dean of the School of Education, Associate Provost, and then just spent, until retiring this spring, many years as Provost. And Newman, Tom, understood that his ideas concerning a university and as a university education were actually idealized concepts that had to be specified in the context of any particular school. Portland has had some real success over the last few decades, establishing an educational experience that provides an integral formation to its students and gives them the opportunity to grow in wisdom, think broadly both within and without of their own discipline, and thrive really in the modern world. Can you speak a little bit to some of those successes that you've had both as a professor and as a provost?
Sure, thank you, Father Chamberlain and Professor Whelan, for the invitation to participate in this event. And I do believe that the University of Portland has done a good job of implementing some of the ideas of Newman. And of course, that is all dependent upon a strong community who works together to make any institution successful, and of course, a supportive president. Let me share with you some of these successes, and I just briefly will do 4 of them ever so quickly. First one a little longer, and then the other 3 are short. But I want to talk to you about the core curriculum and the core revitalization and partnerships between academics and student affairs and experiential learning, and then some of the practices in the academic division. Let me begin with the core curriculum and the core revitalization. The University of Portland, 1/3 of your degree is resting on an interdisciplinary core curriculum that has a series of courses in philosophy, ethics, theology, history, English, science, social sciences, fine arts, and they're focused on a series of questions that are as follows. Who am I? Who am I becoming? Why am I here? How does the world work? Could it work better? How do relationships and communities function? What's the value of difference? What's the role of beauty, imagination, and feeling in life? Who or what is God, and how can we relate to God, and what is a good life, and what can we do about injustice and suffering? And each of these disciplines supplies a particular lens for engaging these questions, and one needs to look through multiple lenses, I think, in order to begin to approach the truth. And wrestling with these enduring questions, students will become, we think, lifelong learners and citizens who are able to understand and appreciate the perspectives of those who are different from themselves. The goal of the core is to serve this vision, of course, and that's achieved through some specific learning outcomes, which are continually assessed. And that is an important aspect of, I think, keeping the core on track. I do want to suggest to you that we found that the core over time, it's been in place for a long period, was in need of some revitalization, all right? And so we had a 3-year study and discussion about it. And then in my last year at the university, we were able to advance a proposal. And I would say, just for those of you that spend your time in higher ed, I just want you to know that there was no bloodshed over the core curriculum improvements. And I think that that's, in fact, it generated a good deal of enthusiasm amongst faculty, regents, and administrations. And of course, that proposal was brought forward by a faculty committee with also administration and student representatives. It brings in some improvements to the core that I just described to you that's in effect right now. And I want to highlight some of those because I think this takes us even with greater intentionality towards some of Newman's vision. First of all, there's going to be new to this a 1-credit course that sets a direction for the purpose of the core. The enduring questions have sort of changed from those questions to virtues and habits. There's a hired core curriculum leader, which we think is important because it will help focus intention and keep the core from becoming, sort of just a checklist of courses to take. We think that we've allowed for credit space for interdisciplinary courses that we hope will help students understand the nature of knowledge is really more holistic. And we hope then for that outcome of emerging wisdom that you referenced. There's an assessment program also that's fairly authentic in that students are asked to demonstrate how they believe they are meeting these habits and virtues through the use of a portfolio and a final essay. And all of these courses, dare I say the word coordinated, or even perhaps a more difficult word to swallow in higher ed, standardized, to capitalize on prior learning and to offer some systemization. Newman indicates the enlargement, of course, of our minds will occur when there's a comparison of ideas one to another as they come before the mind and systemizing of them. We feel our minds to be growing and expanding then when we not only learn, but refer to what we learn and already know. To me, that's important. Professor Whelan and Tillman in one of the readings suggest that students should encounter more than one discipline and that the encounter should be essential to the intellectual formation of every student who enters the university. We hope that this effort would result in raising the intellectual tone of society, cultivating the public mind, et cetera, to paraphrase Newman. Final enhancement is that faculty members in the professional school can co-teach in these courses. And we believe that that is going to make a huge difference in how they carry out these habits and virtues through the different majors. And I would last say about the core and then move on is that it moved from being in the domain of the College of Arts and Sciences a few years ago to the Provost Council, which is a collection of associate provosts and the deans of each academic unit. And that's helped tremendously in making the whole institution more invested in the core. So we used to have deans who were trying to figure out ways to reduce the core so that they could have more courses in their majors. Now we have deans that are all invested in the core. And of course, I don't believe that the dean should be responsible for the curriculum. So we immediately appointed a faculty group to work with them to make that happen. I think that the core curriculum is really some evidence of success. And let me just say that partnerships with student affairs have been important. in an institution of 4,000 undergraduates and 500 graduate students. We have shared programming in a program called Read Up, where we read a common book together. There's formation efforts in terms of academic support and mental health support and all kinds of different kinds of support that are sort of integrated across student affairs and the academic division. We require a master's degree of all these residential folks who are working in our halls, and that's a place where academics and student affairs can interface in the formation of the people who are running those residential halls. And we developed a program called Sequoia, which is a leadership training program where we train academic leaders and student affairs leaders together so that they can assume positions and understand the importance of both of these in the role of formation. And of course, in the Holy Cross tradition, there is a priest or a brother who lives in each and every residence hall. And the third thing is we have been emphasizing experiential learning and these high impact experiences with students. About 30% of our students study abroad, and that's nice, but what we've done with that I think is more addresses what we're trying to accomplish is that we've changed that from sort of a touristy approach to study abroad to actually where the students are more integrated into the society abroad, even engaging in service projects and those kinds of things. We put a great emphasis on faculty-student research. Those kinds of things have been important. There's a special program of applied ethics research as well at the university, provided through Dun & Berchtold Institute for Applied Ethics and Moral Formation. And of course, we emphasize the role of service, transformational experiences, and volunteering. And last of those experiences, I would suggest, are internships. And these internships, more than 50% of our students have very serious academic credit internships. And we believe that this is solidifying the knowledge and practicing the using it, as Newman spoke to us about. Nearly every student has some kind of internship where acquired knowledge collides with other ideas, as is important in a Newman philosophy. And all students have one or more of these experiences. And lastly, the Office of the Provost has engaged in a few activities which I think are important in terms of advancing mission-centered work based on Newman. About every 3 weeks, the office issues an academic update, and that's not really all that significant, other than oftentimes provosts work through their deans, and really provosts are more of, can be kind of a hidden person on campus. And so the idea was here I wanted to have a direct voice with faculty. And so in each one of these sort of newsletter type things, there's always something about admissions. There's always something about our Holy Cross mission, Newman mission. And this doesn't seem particularly novel, but I think that it is a place where we reinforce the importance of admission through the mission through success stories and so on and so forth. The Garavana Center has a once a month meeting that's the provost underwrites wine and cheese. That's always popular, where there's a thorough and engaging discussion on faith and reason and what that means to the university, and the role of religion in a university education. And I also directed the Garavana Center to sort of put together a pilgrimage, and it's a pilgrimage to France to sort of look at Holy Cross tradition, but it is really about what can I understand about the Holy Cross tradition that it also has many elements of Newman in it that I can take back to the university and implement. And of course, we hire for mission as well, interviewing all tenure line faculty. These are some of the initiatives that I think have helped, unless you think this is just a provost rattling off on their bragging about their institution. I do want to say that one of the things I think is also a part of why we've been successful at implementing mission is because the Northwest Colleges, the Commission on Colleges and Universities, is not one of those accrediting agencies who counts the number of books in your library, the number of dollars in your bank account, or the number of faculty members you have. They ask you to define your mission, and they expect that you provide them with meaningful and verifiable evidence that you are actually fulfilling that mission. And we had a visit last October, and this is just unheard of, at least out here, that the university report and accreditation has absolutely no recommendations, only commendations. And, that's quite unheard of. And when the president appeared before the commission, they reinforced that and said, hey, we don't hear of no recommendations. And so I just want you to know that I think that the University of Portland is trying its best to live up to its mission, which includes many of the elements of a Newman vision. So I offer that evidence of success at UP. Sorry, I might have gone on a little longer.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, so we'll come to Rachel now, because when we were putting this together, Gary and I were very keen that it shouldn't just be the, as we say in Ireland, the hurlers on the ditch, the coaches, with the actual players on the field, and the students come first, they come centre, they come at the end of everything we do. And the minute that we lose touch with students, we're kind of lost. So it's great to have Rachel Ingle, who is the president of the student body at Notre Dame, with us this evening. So Rachel, could I just begin, because as I said, maybe we have some idea of who provosts are and presidents are, maybe we have some idea about a student, but just your own personal journey for a moment. How did you end up in Notre Dame, and why did you choose to go to Notre Dame?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. Excited to speak with you all and provide a little bit of a student lens as to what the experience looks like right now on campus. For me personally, I came to Notre Dame. I didn't really have much of a connection to Notre Dame prior to coming here, but after I visited and spent a weekend here when I was a high school senior, I really was sold, and you hear this all the time, but Notre Dame is made Notre Dame by the people. And I think what was so compelling to me was the opportunity to interact with a lot of different students who just had such a heart for service. And it was unlike anything I saw at any other schools or had seen in my life, just encountering such an ambitious and driven student body that was so highly achieving and high aspiring. But the reason that they were motivated to make this big global change was because they saw it as serving a higher purpose. They saw it as doing social good. And that was something that I think is really special, and I found to hold true my entire time here. And in terms of serving as student body president, I've just wanted to be able to give back to a community that I think is going to give so much to the world.
So what's the actual experience been like? Notre Dame went back in person, as it were, and that was a big challenge. But what's it been like for students? Because it's obviously a very different type of semester than you might have experienced up to this. So how has it gone for you? And I know students have enjoyed being back on campus as opposed to living with their parents or whatever. But how has that gone for you? And what would you say the mood of the campus is like now, Rachel, for students?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot to say on that. It's just been so different this year. As you heard, I also took leadership around February. So at that time, I had no vision of what it would look like today. And so it's really just been a dynamic landscape, and it's been characterized by adaptability and flexibility, and we kind of just have to take every day as it comes. And I would say my experiences are twofold. One, as a leader and learning what it means to prioritize and communicate effectively, but also just as a student and a senior myself, and walking through campus on a daily basis and just feeling the experience be different. But I think the Notre Dame student body really is so resilient, and it's been commendable to see the way that people have gathered together to really rise up to the challenge. And just remain with grateful hearts for the fact that we're at least allowed to be here and gather in community together, even if the actual gathering looks a little bit different. I mean, on campus, 4 years ago, I never would have believed that it would look like what it does now. We go to classes with masks on, and we have assigned seats, and we sit on all these little green dots that say here, and they have numbers, and we log that into a system for contact tracing purposes. And our professors are behind partitions of plexiglass just to make sure that they have that extra protective barrier, and they can't cross like a specific line in the classroom. And also everything is dual delivery. So although we do have students present in the classroom, we also have students present over Zoom. And so we've really been experimenting with this hybrid model and learning a lot from that. Outdoor dining is new this year and looks so different. The dining halls are a big communal hub at Notre Dame. And so those have absolutely been flipped on their heads. We erected all these tents on the quad so that people could eat in community outside where it's safer. And so we have new like spaces for that, which has been really cool. And also we have like new social spaces outside with like chairs and fire pits on the quads, just trying to expand the spaces that we're allowed to engage and congregate in, and making sure that it's still under the protocols. And then along with everything being different this year, externally, it's also a presidential election year. So that's been a big thing that we've been trying to navigate as well. And we were supposed to host the debate, the first presidential debate earlier in this semester, and that didn't happen just because of an abundance of caution of not wanting to bring a bunch of visitors to campus, but also wanting to make sure that COVID doesn't override the entire narrative of this year, since something in the national picture is going on. And so wanting to be certain that we are mobilizing students. There's a lot of interest in like activism and national engagement this year. So just making sure we like get out the vote at the same time and navigate that so that we can have like civil discourse and civic engagement. I think in terms of testing, the way we started, we've come a long way from. And so at first, it was definitely baptism by fire. We were all just learning and growing together and figuring out sort of where the flaws in the system were. But I think we've ended with something much more robust. We've gone from, just testing based off of diagnostic needs to now we test like 1,500 plus students a day, which has been a huge increase that we've been glad to see. And now we're piloting different kinds of testing. So we do our nasal swabs and our saliva testing. And I think that's been huge. And also we've been able to see a lot more data transparency, which was huge for students in terms of understanding like what the environment is on campus so that they can best navigate and just go about their daily activities, having some more sense of security about what the situation really does look like. So people have been grateful for that. There definitely have been challenges. And I would say one of the biggest things is that we have less social engagement now, especially for me, like in my senior year. I think this would usually be a time when we're expanding our circles, and instead we're sort of having to go through a process of refinement and being very intentional about who is in our social circle and who we're hanging out with outside of classes. And another big challenge this semester has been academic burnout, just because we're so used to the cadence of a semester where we get a week-long fall break and then we get a 5-day weekend for Thanksgiving. And this year we just truck right along, and it's totally important just so that we're not traveling and going back and forth and carrying pathogens everywhere. But I think we're starting to come to terms with this realization that students are not just machines and they just can't go for an unlimited amount of time and crank through all the work. And people are really starting to feel that burnout and feel like a little bit exhausted about that. And then also just entering the real world and thinking about discernment, I would say it's definitely a little bit tricky to figure out like where I see myself going forward after I graduate, when we don't really know what the status of society is going to look like. Also, we've been missing out on some study abroad, just got canceled for the spring semester as well. So our opportunity to engage globally is a little bit hindered, as well as our opportunity to engage with the community. Usually we like to have a very reciprocal relationship with South Bend, and now just in terms of safety and wanting to try to contain the travel, that's been difficult. But I do think.
Rachel, can I just ask you, I don't mean to cut you off,
Yeah.
about your experience? You're now in your senior year. It was fascinating. I'm sure this year, the idea of fire pits on the quad as an old rector, I'm like, oh my goodness, fires on the quad. Just set my heart pumping. But you're in your senior year, and you've just heard two university administrators talk about what the goal is of education. Can you speak to your own experience? Do you feel yourself growing in wisdom? I know it sounds hard to talk about yourself in that term. Do you find that the Notre Dame has a broad core, that the core, though sometimes irritating in fifth year high school, in your first year, has brought you to a different, a more complete integration and a capacity to think?
Yeah, I think especially propagated by this time, but also just generally in like my other 3 normal years at Notre Dame, I think I've learned so many lessons and just really gotten a much more comprehensive sense of what it is that I'm hoping to do, what it means to like be a global servant, and how I hope to make an impact on this world. I think in terms of like COVID specifically, there have been a lot of lessons, lots of positives as well, lots of new relationships and learning about prioritization. And I feel like now we're all really leaning on each other. So really seeing firsthand the importance of communication and talking to different like constituencies and different spheres of people, and the way that having conversations across different groups of people can really bear a lot of fruit. And so I think that's something moving forward that will be really beneficial. I think the newfound flexibility of this time as well. We're learning how to be a lot more intentional and empathetic in our interactions, and something I had been learning throughout Notre Dame, but especially highlighted now. And then also just like conversations about mental health and empathy, and learning about who we are as humans, and like lots of new creative programming as well. We have like the library lawn, like you're saying, fire pits, or we're trying to like, I think the challenges have bred a lot of new creativity. And like at the beginning of the year, I got to host an event with SNL stars like over Zoom, just because we were trying to find new things. And so I think the biggest thing that I've learned just in the culmination of my experience here is just how you may have a plan in your head for what exactly it is that you think you need to do. And it may seem linear and may seem rigid, but really what's most important is just like responding to the moment, and being fully present and fully engaged with the community that you're in and the community that you're hoping to serve, and how important that is. And I think Notre Dame has just done a great job of anchoring us in our core values. I got some great advice the other day, talking about, like career paths. And someone told me, you could try to chart it out, but really what's most important is just following your moral center of gravity. And I think Notre Dame does an amazing job at helping you cultivate and find like your moral center of gravity, what your true values are, and allowing you to explore things academically, socially, through that kind of lens, and knowing that you can do it and they intersect and they can go together instead of having to compartmentalize them.
Yeah. So Rachel, one last one for you, and then we'll turn to questions and move it out. But I had the honor of having you in an online class last summer, which is where we got to begin to know one another. Though it's tragic in a way that you wouldn't have to come over to Dublin. But my question for you is: you have a huge sense of purpose around trying to improve the life experiences of women, and especially young women in the future, and that's what you want to devote your life to. Was that with you before you came to Notre Dame, or was it kind of deepened through your contact with Notre Dame? And like, how do you see that part of it? We speak about education with intentionality, and like to me, you're a young person with an enormous sense of intentionality, and an enormous sense, as you said there, to be a global citizen. and to, advance the common good. Did you always have that, or was it something that was also nurtured or elucidated from you in the kind of Catholic values aspect of Notre Dame?
Yeah, I think it's always, so I'm really interested in this like intersection between policy and gender equality and how we can advance that in our world. And I think it's something I've always sort of been inexplicably magnetized to. I've always been really passionate about girls' education and very passionate about like current events and like policy within our world and in our community. But I think what Notre Dame did was it unlocked so many doors for me and gave me access to actually getting to talk about these ideas and getting to see them made flesh in a way that I had never experienced. And it showed me a lot more of the nuance of why these inequalities and these injustices exist in our world. Through my education, through my experiences in internships that Notre Dame helped me and helped make accessible. But also, I think the Catholic background at Notre Dame, this idea of like Catholic social teaching and social justice, and why, as followers of Christ, like this is how we're supposed to live out our lives in terms of like helping the marginalized and helping the people who need their voices amplified. And I think just like the marriage of that, being able to see like on text, the ways that this plays out in a more complex way, in practice, getting the chance to do internships and experiences where I got to see like policy play out like more at a ground level. And then also this like overall like Catholic umbrella that kind of like is our guiding light in terms of our experiences. I think all of that made it a lot more possible for this to feel fully realized in me and for me to identify this as something that would be like a life passion project.
Brilliant, Rachel. Thank you so much.
We have some questions from viewers, and I encourage you all to listen. Really, Dara, we have a question from Brendan in Dublin, and ask you to kick off. If others have some thoughts on it, please jump in as well. He's really asking about the kind of Newmanian ideals that he proposes for the university and how we put them into practice today, especially in initiatives that would be more accessible to people from different financial situations, especially those who have less means. I think in my view, it's also asking about training. How do we make sure that those people who need vocational preparation or have a specific direction are also broadly educated?
Dara, I think that's coming to you. Yeah.
No, I think he's trying to talk. Dara, your microphone?
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to. The host okay, you can hear me now. Thank you very much. The host had been muted. No, absolutely. I think it's worth looking again at Newman. That the whole kind of purpose of his education is to say that the training of good members of society. If you think too that when Newman started the university in Dublin, he had 17 students, and to Rachel's point, he had 17 men in his class. So you can imagine first day, what are we here for, boys? So it was an elite. It was an elite group, first of all, and the idea too that the type of education that Newman was providing wasn't vocational, but that it was liberal. In a sense, you have to engage with that because it was a different world. I mean, those 17 boys were destined for the professions, and the professions that relied largely, I would think, on what we would call now the liberal arts. But of course, one of his first appointments in Dublin was a professor of engineering, and they had the medical school in Celia Street. To your point about opportunity, I think you're right. Dublin City University, my own institution of 18,000 students, has the oldest and the largest access program in Ireland in terms of admitting students from disadvantaged backgrounds. And within that group as well, we would have a very large ethnic diversity. And that's important to us, that our ambition at the university is to provide opportunity and excellence. And the two are not, they're not exclusive. We have 95% completion rate of our access students. Now, those are important figures. And then we also have Ireland's largest faculty and Ireland's only university faculty of education. So every child in Ireland is taught at some stage in their career by a graduate of our university. And we also have large outreaches to schools, to disadvantaged schools, what we call deaf schools here in the city. There is again a problem, and Newman makes that point himself about not being, let us not be disrespectful towards particular studies. That I think that again, as Tom said about their own experience, it's where I suppose the training and the formation meets is where the sweet spot is. And that's what we try to do. We also have a large online platform. And in the context of the pandemic, for instance, we offered free courses online available globally on the Future Learn platform to students globally to learn online. So we see this engagement and this access not as a third mission, but of the essence really of what we are. As I say, we are a public university, but at the same time we're values-based. We have faith-based centres. I see Professor Gareth Byrne here as director of our Mater Dei Centre for Catholic Education online. So we try to be a university in the very best sense, open to all and reaching out. That is our mission. That is our purpose.
And that's a great mission. And we have another question there now. This is from Joyce in Pennsylvania. And I'm going to direct this one to Tom, if you don't mind, Tom. The question from Joyce is whether or not during the COVID pandemic, has there been any particular field of study that has suddenly popped out or flourished? Are we, for example, sometimes, we're very dependent now on technology, and technology like Zoom has been fantastic in terms of its robustness and its ability to, reliably deliver a kind of a classroom setting where we need it. But are there areas that have flourished? And I suppose the other consequence of that might be, are there other areas which have, diminished? Because you talked there about the role in Portland of experiential education and the international study, which are obviously maybe not so possible at the moment. But are there other areas that have kind of flourished, is what Joyce wants to know from down there in Pennsylvania.
Well, I would say that one of the things that I've noticed is that nursing seems to be a discipline major that has been able to sort of circumvent some of the challenges around the direct sort of experiences students need in hospitals through simulation labs. Simulation labs have been expanding, and more and more students are, spending more and more time in simulation rather than on the floor of a hospital for a variety of safety reasons. But I actually think that is helping them, because what happens is, you may be on a floor in a hospital, you don't have the heart attack patient come in right then. But, in a simulation lab, you have to be able to respond to a particular, affliction. And you need to be able to do that expertly. And you've got people who are really honed in on what you're doing in response to that. So I would suggest that that's going to be, sort of has been flourishing and thriving despite some of the concerns, about COVID and hospital placement. And I think likewise in our professional school of education, I'm noticing that, students can't go out and do their student teaching, but they are on the computers. They are doing their student teaching, through this medium. And while I think that the COVID situation for both college students and K-12 students are really, it sort of underscores some of the inequity issues. I do believe that on the other side, we're going to be able to know a great deal more about equity gaps in knowledge acquisition and application, and that the schools of education are going to be able to sort of step forward and say, here's what we can do from what we learned during COVID to help close some of these equity gaps, which are a very, very big concern in the United States.
Okay, I think the equity gap is an issue that, well, is coming to the fore in so many different fronts. Another issue that Newman was, I think, interested in was the idea of creating lifelong learning. And as in our world, people are living longer, and that people, hopefully a good broad-based education would lead someone to want to continue to learn across their lives. Several questions. One, mostly directed towards Rachel. You're on the hook here. How do you see yourself now being set up to be a lifelong learner? How did the university help facilitate this? And would you take advantage of more formalized programs later in life that might lead you back through other areas of study?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of my favorite quotes that Notre Dame likes to throw around a lot is the idea of educating the mind, but not at the expense of the heart. So this idea that when we're learning, we can both be growing our mind and our intellect, but also our heart in tandem. And I think that's something that has been drilled into me so much through education, and something that I definitely will be carrying forward with me for the rest of my life. I think just what I've learned through service is so huge. And so the idea that like serving is learning, and that's something that I think is such a key lesson of Notre Dame education. So whether or not it be formal, like I think serving is accessible to anybody. So I, like, the summer after my freshman year, I served at a refugee resettlement agency, and I learned so much there about different populations and different walks of life, and different like experiences. And that taught me a lot about things I'm interested in pursuing professionally. It taught me a lot about policy and like migration politics, but also it just like taught me about how to better connect with people in an intercultural way. And so I think serving opportunities are always available to us and something to always take advantage of. But in terms of a more formal setting, I definitely could see myself pursuing some sort of graduate degree at whatever time it's meant for me to do so. I would love to be able to possibly get a master's in public policy, or a master's in gender studies, or maybe down the line go to law school. So I think my goal is just to do whatever, pursue whatever option where I feel like I'm best able to serve, and what's going to equip me to serve in the way that I'm called to do. But I think in general, Notre Dame has been great about helping us discern and reflect upon how it is we are called to learn, and especially how to do that through service.
Derek, can I kick that one over to you? 1 minute answer, because we're almost there. But are you seeing a shift in the momentum of students in terms of what they're choosing to study? Are you seeing any major shifts in terms of how students are perceiving their future?
Yeah, well, one of the biggest things I think that we've noticed this year, Kevin, and I think it's a trend, that our postgraduate numbers are up probably 30% on last year, which is again significant. So people are deciding, I think, back to the question, they're reorienting themselves. We're also involved in leading the 7 Irish universities in creating an accredited system of what we're calling, or what they call, micro-credentials. So these are bite-sized accredited modules that people can pick up at any stage in their life. And they're directed towards, as Rachel said, these lifelong learners, like the people around the table here today, who may be interested in picking up. So there is definitely a change in the way people think. Just before we end, I mean, in terms of the challenge to the university system, it's worth thinking that back in 1920, your old friend Thomas Edison said that the motion pictures would replace campus lectures. So we'll see how well that has worked in the last 100 years.
Yeah, I know we're drawing to a close, but I just want to say, thinking of Dara, your previous comment, and then Tom, yours, the whole idea of the disadvantage or the underadvantage and where they fit in educationally, I think it's really important for us, especially in the American context, to look at the huge disparity. It's one thing for someone who's already educated to consider more education. I think of the program that Notre Dame sponsored at the prison west of South Bend that Holy Cross still does. There are people who are finding that they have something to say, and they're learning to find their voice, who are otherwise incarcerated and who came from situations where they didn't have a chance. Now, there always is a chance, but they came from a grossly disadvantaged background.
And there always is a chance.
Dara has.
Yeah, I just want to say again that in our experience, and it's a global experience as well, that the pandemic has disadvantaged the disadvantaged disproportionately. And you could see that everywhere in marginalized communities. This has made their lot worse. And as universities, I think we're obliged to respond to that.
Thank you.
Okay, and that it forms a good segue. We want to introduce very special kind of guest who's actually been with us through the whole series. Sometimes in your life, you meet somebody who's deeply inspirational. I've had the privilege of meeting thousands of people in my life, essentially in international education. But I would say of those, the most impressive single person I've met is Mother Maura Hickey, who is with the Benedictine community at Kylemore Abbey. And the Benedictines know something about education. They've been doing it for a very long time, a millennium and a half, and the Kylemore was a wonderful school for many years, and they're now a partner institution of us. So I just would like to ask Mother Maura to reflect on the value of education, and especially an education infused by Newman's values, as you've listened now over the last 3 weeks, Mother Maura.
Thank you, Kevin, Father Gary, and thank you especially for asking me to say a word here at the end of these 3 meetings. I'm greatly honoured. I'm not any longer in the arena where all these issues are being discussed. I'm getting to the end of my studies in lifelong learning, and just saying a word from the sideline this evening. I have enjoyed and appreciated greatly all these 3 sessions. Every single talk has inspired me, and I'd say really especially the couple of younger people, their optimism and determination to deal with the huge challenges that are facing you all at the moment. I lived myself through a challenging era, started my university education in the 60s, and the challenges that have grown and increased since that time, evolved, were just would have been unimaginable at that time. And I'm hugely, hugely grateful to Notre Dame and all of you for what you are doing to keep the human race positive and moving in a good direction in this situation. The most important things that I myself learned in my own education, universities in the UK and living in Germany, and especially in the School of St. Benedict, and living in a community dedicated to education here in Kylemore, learning, places of learning and faith, and that the things that I have brought through life with me are just the things that you are working hard to open up for your students in one wonderful campus, Notre Dame, but there are many others like that, as I can hear from the other people who have been speaking here. And among the things that I learned, profound respect for the person and an appreciation of open and diverse communities, the passion for freedom, a recognition of community as the place that is evolving through all the challenges of the world to keep the human race together, recognition that community costs a great deal. All of these, what I've learned during my life, I find Notre Dame learning from Newman and the whole Catholic faith and tradition, what you are working to keep alive and to pass on to students and to change the world, make the world a better place. So I would just like to say, keep at it. Thank you again, Father Gary and Kevin and all the speakers. I think you're doing a wonderful job. And as I've just said, keep at it. It's worth it in the end.
Thank you, Mom.
Just a last, no, okay.
Go.
No, go. Yeah, Mother
Yes.
Moore.
I was only going to say that one sentence that remained in my mind from one of the talks in the first evenings from Adam, the teacher, who said what is most urgently needed in all of these challenges is the development of an interior life. And I would say amen to that and pass it on. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mother.
Yeah, so it remains just now, and Gary will, as always, have the last word, but it just remains for us to thank really the most important people of all in this, which are those of you who have honoured us with your presence and your loyal presence over 3 weeks. You know, when you do something like this, it's like giving a party. You just get worried, will anybody show up? Will anybody come? And it's been great that we've had such attendance. It's been great that you've stuck with it. Especially over a sequence really of 4 events between the three sessions and the mass. So like that's been brilliant, and I just want to express on behalf of Gary and myself, and on behalf of all our multiple sponsors back on the campus at Notre Dame and elsewhere at the Dublin City University and all our other wonderful partners. We just want to kind of thank each and every one of you very sincerely, really, for joining with us through these events. We couldn't have done it without you.
And it truly has been a pleasure to welcome you here to our home at Newman University Church. The thinking of Cardinal Newman is never out of date. He, in his idea of the university, was striving to challenge us all to figure out how we best educate the people in front of us in the context we find ourselves, to challenge that is new every day. I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank all of you for participating, and know that you always have a home here at University Church and in Dublin with the Global Gateway and the Notre Dame Newman Center.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, so keep at it, guys, and to Dublin. Come to Dublin, come to Ireland, come to Kymore, and we look after you. But thanks so much for being with us, and a particular thanks to our panel tonight, Dara, Tom, and Rachel. We really appreciate your effort, guys. Over and out. God bless, and keep at it, and keep our lead.
Take care.